Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Zeke here again today with, in association with Make Print Not War and Proxy Forge, I guess, to bring you another speed painting tutorial, this time for a couple of Necron Flayed ones. I'm going to try my best to hold this within the camera's line of sight the entire time I paint, but no guarantees. So I have 4 colors on the palette and just some old palette mud here, which I'm happy about because I have gray, I have steel, thrash metal specifically, speed metal by scale, gold by scale, I don't know what it's called, and a flesh tone, all of which we will need in order to paint some flayed ones. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with this gray that's way down here. And the reason I'm going to do that is because you might as well start on the base right away. And I'm more or less just going to dry brush the base to give it some sort of texture and look. I'm going to need a tiny bit of water in this. So I'm just going to wet brush the base a bit to give it a bit more of a textured look. Make it kind of more like something's going on there. I'm not a big base fan, so I'm not going to put too much work into them. And by not a big base fan, I can appreciate a good base. I'm just not a big fan of doing them. Okay, so now it has a bit of texture to it. It looks a bit industrial. Let's go ahead and grab the second one to add a bit more water to this. Maybe pick up some of this gray over here and just kind of like pick out some of the details. Give it a bit of variation. Okay, it turns out I am actually going to need a tiny bit more uniform gray, so I was really hoping I could get away with not using more of it. I don't have that many good grays hanging out, but there we go. So just give it a light brushing. You almost kind of want to dry brush this just so you get different texture because it's the ground. The ground is dirty, the ground is messy. In this specific case, the ground is even cracked. So just kind of like cover it up sloppily. A wash will take care of a lot of this later and make it a bit more appealing to the eye. Okay, I'm going to actually move this away from here and over my lap where I actually paint, because that's going to just work out better for everybody involved. All the way over here. There we go. And now you get a cat in the camera, so, you know, win-win. If I need to show you the colors, I will do that. Okay, so now that the gray's done, I'm going to go ahead and take one of my makeup brushes here. I am going to be using a fairly large makeup brush, but not overly sized, and I'm going to be picking up a ton of thrash metal with that. It's on a wet palette, so it should thin automatically, not to mention thrash metal is pretty thin to begin with. Load up the brush a tiny bit, find a piece of paper towel by leaning over to your garbage pile and you just pick it up from there. Get a tiny bit of the thrash metal off, and then just start covering all the metallic areas, trying your best, but not really putting that much effort into avoiding any of the flesh areas. It will cover, you might notice there's a zenithal on this already. I do recommend picking up a cheap-ass airbrush, learning how to do a zenithal, and getting that done rather quickly in your hobby career. A more expensive airbrush isn't required, especially if you're just going to be using it for priming, which is the main purpose that you should be using it to start with. Get a bit more thrash metal on this. Grab a couple of the corners, grab the hands, be very careful about these delicate little fingers, very easy to snap. And make sure you get the inside of the hand too, because people will actually be looking on this model at the inside. And pick out the chest while you're there. I got a very decent little metal coating on this guy. I'm planning on combining some gold with this thrash metal later in order to get some highlights, some kind of like brassy, coppery highlights that are a bit worn looking. You know, these guys could have had gold on them at one point. Anybody can get the flare virus. Ooh, I have a broken finger on one of these guys. So just cover them up real quick. Try to avoid, once again, the flesh. Try to avoid hitting the camera and making everybody dizzy while you do this. And just go ahead and pick up all that you can of the detail here. Have some hair on these models that I couldn't get off even with tweezers, so I guess you just have to deal with that now. So I'd say get his chest in here, but in all honesty, nobody can see it, and I can't see it, and I can't get to it, so I'm going to avoid that. Really, I didn't do a good job of avoiding the non-metallic bits here, but That's alright. Flesh can cover up metallics pretty well. And worst case scenario, I can put a coat or something on them. Oh man, a song just started out for me way too loud. So that's done already. Let's go ahead and ditch this makeup brush for now. Wash it off, and always wash makeup brushes a bit better than you think they need to be. And then I'm going to, once again, use a makeup brush. This time I'm going to be using a little small detail brush. Small for makeup, not really small for mini painting, but I don't need that small, so I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of flesh tone off of this palette and start picking out the flesh. Again, you don't need to be overly detailed here. You don't need to keep too much in the edges. Things can be cleaned up a bit later. And mainly our objective is to get things paint ready. I'm not an expert painter. The only reason I'm doing this series is A, because some people asked for it, and B, because I want people to be able to get their armies done and painted to a level that is acceptable and makes you feel good about having them on the table. Anything more than that is just a bit too much. And really, when you're trying to teach a beginner how to paint, there's a face on this guy's shoulder pad and I don't know what to do about it. I guess I'll make it fleshy because it's probably a flesh, like an actual face that's been peeled off somebody, right? Yeah. There we go, got the flesh there. As you can tell, the actual flesh tone is a tiny bit weak, so we'll probably be reinforcing that later. But let's just pick up the second Necron right here, and load up that brush, get a fair amount on it. I am learning this. And then just pick out the flesh as best you can. Don't have to be entirely accurate here. Nobody's going to be looking that closely. Mostly these only have to look good from a certain distance away. He has some flesh hanging off his hip there, so let's get a tiny bit more. The main reason I like these makeup brushes is that they hold a ton of paint, so you don't have to dip them very often. You just get them saturated once, and then you can just keep on painting and painting and painting. I'm trying to see if he has any more fleshy bits or if I've got them all here. I think I have got them. So that is the metallic done as well as the fleshy bits. While I'm at it, let's go ahead and clear out this brush and kind of use a bit of the flesh that's left over and this gray in order to get a bit of a better base on these bases. They don't have to be perfect. I'll be putting a wash on them later. But if I take some of this flesh and mix it with some of this gray, I'm going to get a bit of a bone-like tone, close enough that I can actually paint the skulls on this thing. Which there are a surprising amount of. You know, Warhammer-themed things always have to be full of skulls. It's just a rule of the trade. There's some things that I could do in metallic in this, but I'm not going to bother. There we go. Pick this up with the makeup brush again and get some nice solid coats on there. I didn't like what I had before, so decided to go back a tiny bit. There we go. And while I'm at it, I might as well wash this off again, pick up a tiny bit of thrash metal, and just pick out the little tiny detail of this clip right here in metal. There we go. And there's a few shells, which should be in brass, but I don't care. Just make them metal. And let's see where we are right now. Pretty nice looking, but I can do better. So let's take the gold here, and I'll move this over here just to show you what I'm doing. So I took a little thing of gold, and then I'm putting it down right here, and then I'm taking some thrash metal and putting it down. Trying to get a kind of desaturated gold. And there we go, a kind of ugly looking gold for that matter. And you know what, while I'm at it, let's pick up some of this brown too, because why not? And put that in there. There you go, got a nice gross gold now. And I'm going to do the shoulder pads in this gold, just because I feel like it. It'll give it a nice kind of like washed out copper look. This one I just need to get a couple of little bits because there is a face on one of his shoulders. And then this one here, I'll grab that top one. Oh, I just remembered that a couple of them at least have some flesh on their face. And this guy has some flesh just chilling out as well that I have missed. So always good to go over doing the little steps. Make sure you haven't missed anything. I will actually pick up a normal paintbrush here, and I will try to do a bit more of this flesh tone, but a tiny bit better than I did it with the makeup brush, because I missed all this on his hand and up his arm. And then another thing that I missed is this little bit of flesh hanging off here. Really want to lay it on pretty thick with this flesh. I've been having a bit of a difficult time getting this specific tone to adhere to models. But there are plenty of good fleshes out there. It's just maybe not this one. This is the scale fantasy range of flesh, and so far I have not been a huge fan. Okay, now it's time to go with the speed metal. Speed metal, well, actually, no, I have a bit more flesh on his face, so let's go ahead and double back and go with, like, painting his flesh mask a tiny bit. And yes, it is a flesh mask, and yes, that does sound gross, and yes, it is gross. So, what's your point? I don't know. I don't even quite know what this is supposed to look like. This guy's, like, covered in a flesh mask. Oh well, good enough. And get a bit of this face on the corner of the pauldron. Hopefully you guys can see that little face there. Surrounded by white and surrounded by gold now too. Okay, now it's time to go in with the speed metal. Speed metal is magic paint. Just go and pick out as many of the sharp edges as possible. Anything that would really pick up the light. And if we keep in mind, it will go on very, very white, and it will stay very, very white. So be sparing. Use it on little things that poke out. Use it on the edges of things that might poke out, or that might be rusted or worn. You can use, like, I know people often denote rust and wear and tear by darkening things, but you can also brighten things, you know, like the steel shining through something, or the well, what's it called on these guys again? I forget. There we go, got a nice highlight going on him. And let's go ahead and actually grab the tip of his skull here as well, because why not? Get a nice little bit of shine up there. And maybe the bottom of his face too. And now we just move on to the next bit of highlighting. Always paint multiple things at once. It's just good for your sanity. It's good to let things dry. That is a habit that I am not in, that I really wish I was in, because letting things dry would be fantastic for me. Put some nice little bright metal on the edges of this, kind of like right there. And just kind of paint it wherever. I'm gonna actually get some thrash metal in on that ankle, because I apparently just didn't paint it to begin with, and painting it up in speed metal seemed a bit weird. There we go. Now let's get some of that copper that I mixed up earlier, or copper-like stuff, and actually get these casings done properly. Excellent. Now time for the magical oil wash. Sometimes you want to spot wash things. Sometimes you want to be really, really careful. In this exact case, I'm not going to be very, very careful. I have a whole thing of wash right here, and these are cheap, cheap units. If it was something more expensive, I might be a tiny bit more careful, but for now, just take it and dab it on. Remember, this is an oil wash, so anything that you don't like, you can take off with some mineral spirits and a tiny bit of something I can't remember at this moment. Let's get the base first here. Okay. There we go. Oh, I'm out of camera. My bad on that. And done. Now I am going to take a bit of a pause here and then come back once it's a tiny bit dried off, or once I've dried it a tiny bit. Hopefully I can show you something more interesting. But if you'd like to see the pictures of everything I paint, please do follow me on Instagram. and try to track me down on Discord. My Instagram is Proxy Forge or YesExeek. I don't know. I'll link it, I think.